With the arrival of Mr. Valancourt, I will call the meeting of the Board of Selectmen to order, and I'll start tonight's meeting by standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And so we have before us, sent ahead of time, the approval of minutes, or the review of minutes from the September 18th open session meeting. Hoping you all had a chance to review them. Barring any amendments, do I hear a motion for approval?
Move minutes as submitted. Approval?
Motion made by Selectman Nobley. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Selectman Valancourt. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. So we have before us this evening 2 items under communications and announcements. So I'm actually really excited about the group that's joining us tonight because they were really the impetus for getting more of our boards and committees before us, and that is the Sustainability Committee. And I think we have 3 members here this evening. So I'd like to invite all 3 members, if you wouldn't mind coming up and sitting before us, and just state your name and address. And while they come up, the Sustainability Committee is part of the rotation of committees that have been coming before us to provide updates on what they've been doing, while also seeking, I guess, guidance and input and any thoughts we may have about their work and priorities we might want them to place on their agenda for the coming year. So without further ado, thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead,
Thanks for having us. My name's Andrew Mitchell. I live on 1 Faulkner Road.
Joanna O'Connell. I'm at 55 Brightwood Ave.
Dave Shaw, I live at 5 Kieran Road.
I gave you guys just a little 5-page presentation just to give you guys an idea of sort of the things that are on our minds when we have meetings and we talk about the things that we'd like to see happen in the community. Without kind of reading through all that, Phil asked us to come with maybe a couple ideas of like sort of things that we might be able to start acting on more sooner than later, and that would be the townwide recycling bins and recycling in general, just increasing in the community at businesses, at apartment complexes, and throughout the town. We really like the idea of having like more of these trash recycling bin type things. So that was one of our sort of ideas that came up in our meeting. The other thing is,
you're talking about just for folks at home that are watching, so you're talking about the recycling bins on the street corners, correct? So
yeah, exactly. Public trash receptacles.
We realize that there may be some things, North Side, I believe, is doing the recycling now. I know JRM supplies those bins for other towns, so I'm not sure if that's something we can work with Northside to, with the town, with Northside, to kind of get some of those supplied to us. It's going to be more work for them if they're going to have to go around and, empty them, but maybe we can, somehow combine with you guys and figure out a way to get them involved, since they are the people that are doing the, collecting or recycling.
Right.
So that might make it a little easier, not just come all out of our budget kind of thing. Go ahead.
Are those public trash receptacles? You mean like the ones that are at street corners?
Are you out?
I'm asking the question because I'm sorry. Are the bins we're talking about sort of the joint recycling trash bins, the ones that are in public locations today?
Right.
We have a few scattered around the town that are black, and some of them say trash and some say recycling, which would like to maybe even steer away from those because they don't seem to be, people aren't really, and we don't have many of them either.
No problem. So those are actually town purchased, picked up by the town. Nothing to do with JRM, nothing to do with TBI or Northside. Those are town purchased. So absolutely, it actually makes it easier, right? So neither town purchased, they are town purchased and they're picked up by town employees. So that's something we certainly, but it's not related to any of the contractors we have.
Okay.
So is that something that the contractors?
Nothing to do with the contractors.
That's just.
We purchase the barrels, our staff picks them up. So as it relates to initiatives which you may forward, and may be recommended, that's something that, again, checking off a list and working with Public Works, we may be able to purchase in the future. the kinds of receptacles you're talking about, and just make sure that we manage the pickup in a way to keep the trash and the recycling separate. But I just want to be clear that it doesn't have to do with anything to do with any of our contract
Okay.
relationships.
And what about the schools? What about the recycling bin supplied to the schools? Because Northside Carting goes to the schools and picks up the recycling there,
Correct.
so.
So, and, again, sorry. So Northside no longer is, TBI is the company, so again, this is more enough for your benefit for the broader conversation. TBI is the entity that does our recycling. They subcontract with a company that they actually own, which is Northside, but in essence, it's TBI is the relationship we have. They still, that is where at schools and in other public locations like behind Town Hall, where the recycling would go, and that is something still managed by TBI/Northside.
Okay.
But that's different than the public street receptacles
Okay.
that are picked up by our staff.
Okay,
So at the schools right now, there is a trash dumpster and a recycling dumpster. The trash dumpster is provided by the trash hauler, which is JRM, and the recycling dumpster is, it says Northside on the side, and that's TBI. Yes.
it has come to my attention because I had been speaking with people at the schools in the district, and it appears that those dumpsters for the recycling get filled pretty quickly and not emptied enough.
Yes.
And in turn, they're throwing things away, and so I know that
Yep.
it would be maybe beneficial to have an extra pickup or two a week, especially like at the high school where you have so many
Yeah.
students. So,
We'll talk about that. I know that on the trash, it's actually picked up twice per weekend in most locations, because we found that the trash fills faster than the recycling. But if there are locations that it's filling quickly and people are commingling, again, that's something you just give to my office, and we'll communicate through Public Works to the various vendors, but we can certainly work with them to pick it up more often if it's costing. One thing we've been able to do by having two different vendors now is we were finding in a lot of complaints that that when Northside was doing trash and recycling, they were taking the recycling off and
Just-
putting into the trash truck. And now with the two different vendors, that can't happen technically.
that's great, yeah, that's really good, because I noticed that
So
too.
is that the problem with the bins that are around town, is that they get commingled, and they don't really separate them? Because I see them, they're used all the time, I mean, they're usually full, the ones like around the common and everything, but they're not being, the trash side as opposed to the recyclable side is not being respected, right? Is that what the
I
problem?
There
don't-
are no two sides on the ones that are like the single barrels that are in the common and other places. The majority, if not all of those, are really single stream barrels. The question is whether we
No,
change
they
them.
have a recycle side and they have a trash side. There's two,
Yeah,
there's two
In a couple of
compartments.
locations, but like, for instance, at the Hills and over here in Main Street, it's just a single barrel.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about all around the common.
The common,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think the Memorial Park also has.
has the separate ones.
Same, yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, that's it. The library park, those are the ones I'm thinking of in my
Yeah,
head.
I think
So,
it is difficult to enforce that, right? Unless people just consciously do it.
right. I think it's worthy of, again, on our kind of list of things to do, maybe we, look at the entire town, see where they're needed, because there's certainly not enough on Main Street. I mean, you go in the CVS Plaza, there's maybe one trash barrel, like maybe two, definitely no recycle bins. So, and there's a lot of people coming in and out of there just with the farmer's market alone. So, I mean, I think it's worth kind of,
The farmer's market does have separate recycle bins.
assessing, oh, good.
Yes, we have
Good.
separate blue ones too. It's
Awesome.
absolutely
Good, good,
recycling.
good.
And the barrels inside the mall are not ours.
I was going to say.
They're the,
They're not yours?
no, because that's a private
Ours.
property. So
Yeah,
it's
there's not
private.
many, if any.
But
So that's the property management company, whoever owns like
Yes.
that?
Yeah, so if, yeah.
I believe they're on site.
But all things that can be worked on, John.
A lot of ins and outs.
A lot of ins and outs, yes.
While we're
No one said
talking about the
government was simple.
recycling, and maybe you're gonna mention this, but some of the apartment complexes do not
Mm.
recycle, right? So how can we get,
So,
because
nice.
I think some of the residents want to. Some residents have
Yeah.
said to me, I can't recycle my.
do, you say it.
Well, if
But it
the-
is, it's up to their management.
So two things. There are certainly the management company limitations. That is a conversation with a management company, and hope that the management company sees a benefit in doing that. There's also, the town has a relatively unusual trash bylaw, which is, I think, 1990s vintage, and maybe worth at least a level of review, meaning that it sets the standard for allowed barrels at any home at 8, which is no longer anywhere close to what, first of all, most people don't need 8 barrels. Some folks are recycling, they may need 2 or 3 recycling barrels and usually need 1 trash barrel. So the current bylaw, which was done in 1990s when things were just dramatically different, I don't know how much we recycled in the 90s, at least maybe we're at some level of look where we have some numbers that probably don't encourage folks to recycle as much as maybe they could.
That's definitely, yeah, because we're talking 20-plus years ago now, and things have come much, changed a little bit within that time.
What I found personally living for 3 years in one of the condo developments in town, when I moved in, they did allow recycling. And they had 2 recycling bins, totes, that were very obviously for recycling right next to the dumpster. And despite the fact that there was a dumpster right next to it, people would walk out there and throw trash a lot into the recycle bin. And so probably after my first 6 months, all of a sudden the totes disappeared, and I asked one of the trustees what happened to them. And they had said that they had gotten rid of them because the hauler didn't want to keep segregating what was trash when they weren't supposed to be picking up trash. And so, I mean, I knew when I moved in what it was to recycle in town because I had previously lived here. A lot of people move into the condos in town, though, not having had the same type of recycling experience. And so they're either coming from communities where it's not single stream, or it doesn't pick up all of the, you don't get, maybe it's just paper that they're exposed to wherever they're coming from. So like I know in like my development, for instance, I would gather that in my one courtyard, maybe a third of them were actually not even from originally the United States. And so I was like, why didn't you educate the development? Why didn't you educate neighbors, at least, annually about this? And they didn't. And so that might be a way that you could increase recycling there, is just educating the trustees about ways they can get information out to, the people who live there. So rather than seeing a problem and saying, people don't want to follow this, I mean, I would say that a lot of it has to do with people just don't realize what are you allowed to recycle and what aren't you allowed to.
I would even add to that, there's a pitch to them, maybe there's an appeal. I mean, right now, if you're looking at places to live, saying, hey, this is one more way that we're connected to the community, that your pitch to them is, this is one more reason why you want to use our project, because we care about it more. The other thing, we were talking this morning about the developments for the seniors in town. And is there, I don't know, what is the status? Is there anything in any of those projects at all?
That's not, we haven't
haven't
visited them.
No.
I have seen that they do have recycling boxes in some of our elder services, elderly housing, elderly handicapped housing. I've seen them in their hallways. I don't know if anything goes beyond that, but I would imagine it would.
Maybe one of our action items should be to just do our own evaluation of where we see everything, where we see all the bins, which ones are single stream, which ones are, trash separate from recycling, and then talk to the different apartment complexes and maybe come back to another meeting and give you guys, unless you guys feel like you have that information, but we could probably.
Is that, I don't think that's information we would have readily available, because we would have no reason actually to have, unless a committee like yours grabbed it. I mean, I'd certainly be interested.
Yeah, and then by knowing the state of the state, then we can formulate a plan and present to you, and maybe get your ideas on how we can improve things.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
How do we find out management companies of apartments and things like that? How do you?
There's really,
Just go and talk to
there's
them.
not a lot of them,
Yeah.
and you'll often find that different complexes use the same one.
The lobby of every building will have the
Lobby
name
of
of the
every-
management
that's
company and
right.
telephone number.
Good call,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. Yeah, that's a good goal, because we have about, 8 people maybe?
Yeah.
So we could divide that up a little. Okay.
I think it's
That's good.
important to put that together, because then you've got some empirical data, which
Yeah.
then we can share. And,
Uh-huh.
that's the one thing that we have a platform here to do, which is to get that out. And now you've got a starting point. Here's where we are. Where do you want to go? I don't know yet. Let's just first find out where we are. I think that's a great idea. However many receptacles, or, whatever. I'm sure you guys run with it. That's your game to
Right.
sort out. But good. Cool.
Do we feel like there are ways that we can better utilize the sustainability committee to
It's
help
leading
promote
towards that.
the textile recycling?
Say it one more time, I apologize.
is there a way that we can better utilize, I mean, you're saying you have 8 active members, and I mean,
Yeah.
certainly passionate members. Are there ways that we can utilize this committee to help educate the entire community, not just condo developments, about the textile, specifically about the textile pickup?
I think one of the things that seems to be missing is the education piece, quite frankly. I think whether that's about individual condo developments or people's home recycling, I think sometimes people don't understand fully how much they can recycle. And having a single stream recycling, actually, there's an advantage. You should see higher recycling rates, right? You don't have to split it into multiple spots. So those are all advantages, but I have been somewhat surprised from my experience in other places. We seem to do the least amount of public outreach and communication to groups about recycling. That's more common in other places as they try to increase their recycling grade and reaching out to private developments, reaching out to any number of groups and saying, here's what recycling is, and putting out messages about that. And we certainly can partner with you with a website and social media to do that. Commonly in a lot of communities, it operates through the Board of Health. That's some places Board of Health, some place Public Works. Here it probably is Public Works because they oversee the contract. But we're more than happy to, again, either with the textile, but with all of it, and give people the opportunities to understand what's available for recycling. We also do have drop-offs for recycling on Holt Road at TBI, which is an advantage that a lot of communities don't have, where folks have the opportunity if their recycling isn't picked up or they have an excess of material to be able to drop it off there, which is a good advantage. But I'm not sure everybody's aware of that either.
Is that still free for everybody to drop off at Old Road?
Yeah, we just find sometimes we just find some of the same problems with commingle a little bit, that things end up, because it's not supervised, folks have if there's a question, it ends up in the trash side rather than the recycling side, or it ends up in a bin that they use for other purposes. So yes, it is still free, that people can still do it's all part of the original agreement signed years ago, that folks have the opportunity to do that.
We did, I was telling Andrew this, not many years ago, maybe 6-7 years ago, we did have a newsletter that would go out quarterly.
We still do.
Do we, no, the one person's trash, like it was an actual.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, a trash roll, yeah, no, we don't.
It was, you
A lot of
guys
green
remember
on
that?
it.
I mean, there was
Green ink.
there was, but I mean, it was almost like getting, I mean, it wasn't a newsletter as in one sheet or a folded sheet. It was probably 6 pages, 8 pages of newsprint that was mailed directly to everybody's home. I think it was Grant, it was town, it was.
That was explaining the trash.
The Sustainability Committee
And
supported,
ideas,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, it was everything from like how to
Like a penny
compost
saver,
or,
What about environmental?
yeah, it was not,
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
I think it was grant funded. I haven't had the opportunity to speak to that. Tina Klein was the chairman at the time of the Sustainability Committee. It was actually probably before it was even the Sustainability Committee. But
Right.
it was relatively recently. I mean, it was within the past decade.
We were one of the first communities in this area to do the commingling. That was part of the negotiated contract with the facility on Holt Road, so.
No, it definitely makes it easy. I mean, like you said, I have more recycling than trash, for sure, so. That's a good thing to
So
cut
that's
down on
another
waste.
thing that we can help with is like the outreach
Mm-hmm,
and spreading the word in different ways
mm-hmm.
through social media.
Yeah. We can certainly help with that.
Newsletter.
Let's see.
The other thing that actually occurs to me, so we have a number of events in town, right? The sheep shearing, fall festival, farmer's market, we got all these things going on, and it's, we were talking about this a little earlier today, about how there's things like this that you literally have thousands of people going through, and what a great opportunity interface, and it's not just sustainability committee, but it's all these sort of things. We've got a great opportunity to get a message to folks and to educate. How do we use these events? Maybe it's a question for the festival committee, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I had a more detailed point of that, which is at the farmer's market, since theoretically people who are shopping at a farmer's market would very much be caring about, sustainability. Is there space at in the farmer's market for a town committee to, maybe it's even rotating, but a town committee to give out material?
I don't know.
at the
So it's
farmer's
funny, the
market.
reason this all started is because Andrew is a volunteer at the
Yeah.
farmer's market, as is his wife.
Yeah.
And so one thing that we're doing at that market specifically to support town activities is like, so the Master Plan Advisory Committee has printed out all the flyers you're kind of seeing on Facebook, and so we hand out hundreds of bags every week, free
Right.
bags, and so those have been stuffed in by volunteers. I mean, we could certainly, I can't imagine what black and white copies would cost. We could certainly put them in the bags. We have 650 more bags to go through, to hand out. So like that would be a start if it's about getting information out.
Right.
But, and I have to say, I've always been really impressed because they do go to the sheep sharing, because I did see
Yeah,
Shoba
yeah.
and Brian, I think, were volunteering at the sheep sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that would be a great way to get the information about the textiles out as well, if you guys are talking about that at these type of booths, because we do, again, the Fall Festival just passed, but sheep sharing you're already plugged into, even 4th of July on the Common.
So we've been trying to look for a way with your giving us some direction to do that, to make the pink bags available. We've just been concerned of just plopping them in a corner somewhere. But if you did it in that setting, we certainly could get the pink bags so they could be handed out as, I think, a couple of things. One is the bumper stickers that could be placed on 30-gallon barrels really help, because now we're 30-gallon recycling as opposed to the blue bins drive me nuts, because you need a couple of them, right?
Yeah.
So
Red.
things like that,
Just
and
saying.
well,
Just saying.
green typical recycling, so we're sorry, we're contrarian a little bit, but the, in the pink bags, I think we could also provide, so if folks wanted to understand the textile, they get a bag and they can fill it. So we certainly could provide you with, if you could find space, we can provide the kind of material that would help.
If you're up for it, we have a tent
Yeah, we've been
Is it
talking
recycling?
about,
It's not
I mean,
green.
what's left of the farmer's market though, a couple weeks though, right?
this Sunday and the Sunday
That's what
after.
it's
Yeah, so
stickers.
that might,
Yeah.
For next year.
maybe, but we were at the festival too, but this was on our kind of docket too, over the, when we met again in September, we took a little break for the summer, but, we definitely want to get more involved with the festivals. We kind of had just some things that we threw together at the last festival.
We didn't even have a logo that was a high enough resolution to like blow up and put on a banner, so my wife's in the process of
Yes.
we're trying to design a new logo that we can blow up and be more visible at places like the sheep shearing. And then on top of that, we've been talking about everybody's looking for like giveaways at those things, but maybe we can give away like reusable bags or
Yeah.
recycling stickers or,
We were thinking about those two things.
yeah, just to get somebody to come over to our,
If they whipped up,
Handouts
a
are key.
flyer, do we have the ability to print up
Of course.
a black and white? I mean, that's
Color-
at the
color
very least,
even.
that's
I think
something
we
like
can do
just
color.
thinking about one event in town like that.
Yeah.
At least the farmers market could take several hundred if.
yeah,
If
so
you guys
we
had a
just come up
flyer.
with a one-page flyer that
Yeah.
kind of hits on all the things that we,
And if,
Okay.
Absolutely.
and then the other thing that if there's time, we wanted to just talk about, and this is something that, a subject that we don't really have a lot of information, so we're hoping to get some information, if possible, from you guys, and maybe just learn about, solar usage in the town. Do we actively try to incorporate that into town buildings or, lighting for playgrounds? Either in the past or maybe plans for it going forward, because we'd like to help in any way we can to kind of make that a reality.
I give you Reader's Digest, and then we could go from there if this helps. So,
We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
Especially putting on buildings and stuff.
yeah, so we did, I appreciate that. So the reason, there was a conscious decision to partner with Osgood Solar, because however long and complicated it took, it was such a large facility. The benefit to the town, meaning not only to just the entity itself and the power it generated, but to the municipality was significant. And my experience with putting individual solar arrays in buildings is that it ends up being complicated and the payback period is extremely long. And the reason is that commonly you don't own them. So very rarely does a municipality own its own solar. So a high school install, as an example, on a high school of our size, 300,000 square feet, would probably generate enough power to offset about 20% of the electric cost. The problem with that is you're renting the space to get the 20% back, which means someone else is installing an asset on your roof. And so if the roof isn't in a particular good condition, then they just sort of voided to that. The install typically can take place during the school days, and then you have workers and others, so you start to compound the complications of these discussions. It's going to be on the roof for 20 years. Will the roof last 20 years? Because if there's a leak, then you have the complications with that. And so as you start to add up the complications of saving the 20%, you often find that the return isn't as much as you think it is. And that doing something like we recently did with Osgood Solar means we're getting back a 15% savings on every electricity bill we have in the town of North Andover and the municipality side, without having to worry about renting our roof or the condition of the roof or any of the other conditions that go with that. And so the reason this board and I went forward with the Osgood Solar proposal is we got a comparative return or savings in electricity without any of those other wrinkles that come with placing rented assets on top of buildings. And now that we've get this benefit, our electricity bills will go down, and so that 20% savings is now negligible. So the conscious decision to buy into the big plan was made because buying into the smaller individual plans just weren't worth the payoff. So for us, solar has been, another larger scale or even medium scale solar wouldn't have the payoff that it would say for a homeowner or some others.
Right. So maybe the best way for us to affect, positive change in this light is to, again, it's like education about the benefits for homeowners and maybe trying to impact
Absolutely.
and get the rate of usage up for our residential.
Absolutely.
And there is solar, the Solarize program as well.
Yes.
Which I don't know if that's been investigated yet within the town or if it's been pursued.
What is it? What's the program?
Yep.
It's Solarize Mass. It's basically each town can apply.
Oh, okay.
And you're able to get, like a vendor to provide solar for the entire town at a better rate than what folks would be able to do on their own. It's generally geared towards the residential folks. I've talked to the guy that ran it in Andover, and there's some work to get it started. But again, it would be something that once we get the ability to do that, then it's really an education and awareness and letting people know. I mean, I'm seeing stuff on people's houses go up all the time. Every time I go drive around town, I'm seeing these things.
And buildings are being built everywhere
Yeah.
like this with solar and with, gold LEED certified. I mean, this is the way of the future. This is kind of, we don't really have a choice for the future of, our kids and stuff. I mean, I think it's something that I really think it needs to be considered to get more energy efficient as a town. I mean, we are really, really lagging behind towns just surrounding us. I mean, Andover, and I know that they have maybe more funds and whatnot, but I think, there's a lot of programs that Massachusetts is doing grant-wise and initiatives, and they want, I don't know, I just feel like, we feel like there's gotta be, I'm not discounting what you're saying, I feel like maybe some more research or,
Can you be more specific about some examples you found out? Because we are so open to do things that I think we're pretty great. So give me.
I haven't researched things specifically, but like, the Bancroft School in Andover is LEED certified gold. They have,
New construction fairly recently?
yeah, in the last 2 years.
Yep.
But I mean,
Yep.
we have a DPW building going up right now. We have a kindergarten complex
Yep.
going up. This just went up. So I mean, there's, things that I feel should be or should have been, this could have been incorporated into, just for the future, because, again, if we don't work towards it now.
And I would say, and this isn't sort of a debate, I appreciate your position on it. I think it becomes, and we certainly in other forums as different buildings are being built, we'll probably have this conversation. I think the good news is, because there is such attention paid to the topic of sustainability, there are a lot of choices. And communities and residents in communities then get a choice as opposed to sort of one option. The really sort of great part is there are choices. So as an example, our relationship with Osgood Solar is unique in the sense that it's that large, and it's the largest scale project in the state. So we're unique that way. So we do something in that regard that other communities don't do. We don't do the LEED certified because the cost increases 40 to 50% more than the bill that's being paid. And in order to fund those in the way we do, it does a lot of debt exclusions and overrides. We don't, because there's a balancing act to that. We do other things in terms of renewable energy. We're in the process, actually with Andover, of pursuing replacing all of our street lights with LED street lights. And so we're doing that through a combination of grant funds and some other opportunities. We were the first in the region to buy its own streetlights so that we could take the step to this regard. First one in Merrimack Valley to do that, and we're changing to to take on the LEDs to further lower the costs. And so there are certainly, it doesn't mean we take advantage of everything, and certainly I think opportunities are opportunities, we should take advantage of them. I just want you to know that we do think about that. We're the only group in the region right now with an electric car that's servicing our inspectional services department, fully funded through a grant, fully electric, not a hybrid vehicle. It's electric, and they go off, and until I got into it one day and kept on pressing the button and waited for the noise, and it didn't happen. And then when I left, others wondered why I'd left the car running. But anyway, other than that problem, because I'm old school, we are doing a lot of things, and we can do them. We certainly can do them better. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I think that we are certainly open to suggestions. But I don't want to leave the impression that we are not pushing as hard as others in that regard. I think the LEED certifications are complicated because it would add costs that would probably have meant we wouldn't have done half the projects we would have done. And I would rather do the projects and balance some of those needs than forego the project. So that's a broader
There's conversation. things that we do that, we have a lot of preserved open space and things like that is also really good for the environment and conservation. So I think we're pretty far ahead in that regard.
I feel like, Andrew, a lot of the things you just mentioned, I've actually communicated out to different people who've reached out to me since I've been elected about sustainability and their interests, and I've shared some of these things. I know we've talked about them in meetings, but that doesn't mean people are watching the meetings, so we should probably, it would be great if you guys could, we want you to go to all in this meeting, but if you guys could, in your community outreach, maybe communicate some of these things, and we probably should do a better job too, and maybe, I'm looking at the website right now, under sustainability, we don't talk about the street lights that we're doing, we don't talk about the electric car, so I think we could do a better job of being more transparent and doing more community outreach so that people know what we are doing, what great things we are doing.
Agreed.
And then, as you guys have specific things that you think we should do or look into, bring them, and we can talk about whether or not it makes sense, right?
And that doesn't even mean necessarily coming in this form, right? I mean, they can go directly to the town manager's office.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would hate for you guys to think that anytime you came up with an idea, you have to
Wait
get
for
on
the
the
next
agenda and
meeting.
come to this meeting and speak publicly and have it hashed out that way. I mean, I think there are a lot of opportunities that we've just discussed this evening that
Yeah.
when we say talk to us, it's not necessarily come back at a future meeting, it's exactly. run with it.
Does Jim
Well, you get
attend
updates,
their
too.
meetings? Does Jim attend their meeting, like, is this a?
Yeah, I don't know if he
committee that
does.
has
I know
a
Steve
staff
Foster usually
person.
attend pretty regularly. I don't know
Yeah,
where
he's
he
pretty
stands.
regular.
Yeah, so-
And Bruce?
So there's a
Bruce-
regular
Bruce used
touch
to,
point there.
and Bruce's predecessor used to attend these meetings.
Yeah,
as well.
whatever, I'll have to communicate back to Jim to see.
Yeah,
what his
Bruce had
status
a-
on those.
Bruce had a relationship with I think,
But we also have the newsletter that goes in the tax bill.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
you can't take up the whole thing, but just some important maybe bullets. And maybe a nice push around Earth Day is always, people are cleaning, they're cleaning up and cleaning their yards and emptying their garages and everything else.
Could they, as a committee, weigh in on their own page on our website? And
course.
I mean,
That's the
I don't know
reason-
if you're, like, I was just thinking, like, even what you presented this evening as short-term and long-term goals, like, this would just be an interesting intro piece to have up there as a graphic for anybody who wants to learn more.
Sure.
We can post anything on that webpage you like, really.
But knowing that they can, I mean, that's important, because sometimes you don't think that you can ask, and you can ask to do that.
Who would be our contact for?
Website, just contact my office and we'll figure out from there. If it ends up being sort of a regular update, we'll provide some resources so you can get on and get that stuff. Because what happens, obviously, it gets stale, so the fresher the information, the better it is. Helps us. So either we'll start with it at first, start posting it, and then maybe it'll end up in IT shop, but we'll see where we go from there as it relates to that.
And the interesting thing about you going into the tax bill, there is a correlation between what we pay in taxes and how much we have to pay for the disposal of trash. So,
Yep.
it's got to be just short and sweet and
Yeah.
right to the point. But
And I think it would really, because I think there are a lot of things that we've done, and probably a disconnect, which I'll take responsibility for, is there's a lot of things that we've done that we're not communicating well enough to the public, and quite frankly, not well enough to you. that probably would answer some of the questions as to where we stand sort of comparatively. The ESCO project, as an example, the only one done in the region, $4 million. A number of different things that have been ongoing to reduce our footprint. I mean, it's been dramatic. We're down about 25. We're actually, our goal under the ESCO is 20% reduction in all energy consumption, and we're up to 16% already in energy consumption reduction, which is pretty aggressive. So I think there are things that we obviously need to be communicating better, not only to the public, but to you folks. And I do strongly believe, sort of on your first topic, this community has, recycling is not about new material. It's about moving things from the trash to the recycling. It seems to me we have some room there. It really does, that we, whether through education or otherwise, that we've got some room to move things that are in the solid waste. Looking at the tonnage totals, we've been relatively static for a community that's growing. That's a little surprising. I think whether it's communication or some of the method, I think there's a real opportunity to move some of the tonnage that's ending up in our trash into our recycling. And that'd be a really important goal in terms of the long term.
Right.
We've also been talking about that with the schools. We do the food rescue program at the schools. Are you familiar with that?
No, what is that?
So any unwanted food that the kids have, like say they don't want their banana that day or half a sandwich, whatever it is, and the kids were told at the beginning, don't throw away food that you would eat, but if it's something that you don't want, put it in this basket, and then the people that work in the CAF take the food from the basket and they put it in a cooler, and then a volunteer goes around and picks up the cooler from all the schools. This is every day. We bring it to the high school and we sort it to different boxes. Some fruits and fresh things go back to the nurses throughout the schools, and then others go to the Daybreak Shelter, a women's shelter in Lawrence. We make deliveries there twice a week.
And
We've done a lot.
but it's not a half an egg sandwich or anything like that, because
The shelter takes that.
Yeah, no, that I talked to Amy Mabley about it, and
Oh, yeah,
it's
she-
a great program, but
Yeah, she
it's
is
ma-
great.
a lot of it is, like you said, the fruit. It's
Mhm.
something that's,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
wash it, and, yeah.
Yeah, the nurses take a lot of the fruit because, especially at Thompson, a lot of kids don't have snacks, and so our nurse really appreciates that stuff coming back, because the kids come and, ask for a snack, and now she's able to give them a healthy snack instead of saltines or, not that that's not
Saltine snack.
healthy, but an apple is better. So, along with the food rescue, which has been doing great, it's lacking volunteers, of course. But there's also the side of if we could incorporate recycling and composting eventually, this is like a long-term goal. But throughout the schools, you could go from tons of waste, which, as you said, that, there is a lot of waste, to, a kid has just the crusts, he's composting those, and he's recycling his water bottle, and he's given the banana to the food rescue, and everything else he ate, and he goes and he actually has no waste. That's a goal that, we're looking towards, and is slowly happening. I've had some contacts in different schools, and, I have people that are interested in doing that. But I know it takes a lot of work, and it's hard when you only have a handful of people, as you guys know, because you're all, probably have volunteered in your lives. Where was I going with that? Oh, I did want to address, and I don't know who you think, this is more advice maybe to you guys. So the middle school and the high school, I haven't been to the middle school, but 3 out of the 5 elementary schools use foam trays for hot lunches. Middle. Foam, styrofoam trays, hot lunch.
One-time use one? Is that one-time use?
One time.
Mhm.
And they get thrown right in the trash. So, you go in after lunch at the Thompson when I get the food, and it's like, they have barrels just filled with these, these foam containers. I think that is that would cut down immensely on the trash. It really would. And I don't know if we can go back when we were kids and we had the
Trays.
big, you paid whatever it is up front, and the hot water and the disinfectant, and they reuse the trays.
Oh, the plastic tray.
Yeah, like those old school trays, or if we could get a recycled material kind, and then we
But
could
that's what
put
they
them in the
use
recycling pile.
In Boston, Mass Pioneer, they're paper trays, they're cardboard, recycled cardboard trays.
Yeah.
But then we'd have to recycle those. 'Cause then that
Okay.
wouldn't, I know, but I'm just
We could
saying,
do some recycle instead of having
Yeah,
to start.
Yeah, but you just take that and,
Yeah.
just throw it all in a bin. Why wouldn't we be using that?
But I guess the
That's
question is how
so
would,
that's not a policy we have any control
No, but
over
that's a
collectively,
question. I
correct?
think it
And
comes
that's-
down
well, that's what I was gonna
dollars.
ask, like, how is that?
It's a school
is that-
question.
yeah, so,
Yeah, and that's not passing the buck, but that is a
No.
school management thing, and that may not even be that's not something I think that's even necessarily a vote. I think that's talking to the school administration building,
Okay.
and
so the main
It's
building,
Erica
yeah,
Long.
across from
Yes.
Kittredge.
Yeah.
And just talking to
I mean,
them
it could
about
be
it.
contractual for all we know.
Could be contractual,
Yeah,
could be.
most likely is.
Or we get the products from there.
Yep.
but that's a great observation and a great.
Yeah.
good point.
Okay.
It's just, I mean, if you think about the number per day that could be, it's
Yeah, I think
immense.
if the whole town, everybody in the town heard that and wanted to vote on whether to continue or not, you'd probably get most people.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, because I did ask about this years ago, I think a lot of it has got to do with the salaries for the people to be washing the dishes and or the trays, in the water usage and the electricity, and then when you figure it out, the foam just kind of drives me crazy.
Yeah, because you
And
can't really put a
recycled
price
cardboard.
tag on the environmental impact when they're sitting in a landfill and they're just like sitting there and there's so many of them, so that's where it kind of gets fuzzy. But you're right, the one-time use of, say, buying that machine and then the water and all that, I guess it would have to be all kind of written out and researched and all that stuff. But it's worth going to that school main building and seeing what they have to say about it,
And maybe the things have
starting there.
changed now, maybe they've got better water usage for that kind of stuff, or whatever,
Mm.
more
I think
energy
we're-
efficient. So, yeah, you gotta revisit it.
I think what Chris was saying as well, like they're using a recycled tray. It's,
Yeah.
they're
Better
pretty
than the
common
foam.
now. And, I know someone whose son actually did kind of did an analysis on this and kind of presented a solution for this, but was basically shot down by, I don't know if it was middle school at the time, but, and part of it is probably not going to the right people to have that discussion, but, there's a kid that's, taken time and had some really good thoughts, and rather than take it and say, hey, that's a great idea, let me take it to the administration, it was just basically
Go away.
shoved on the side. So it'd be nice to just have someone that can help at least be open to it, so we can, look at the options.
I think
I'll do that, I'll put that on that'll be my area. Do we have another minute, or are we done? Do we have to stop?
if you felt like that. So I was just going to say, I think that a lot of what we talked about this evening, it's just to underscore it is, I mean, a lot of it you can be advocates for this, and that's why we're appointing you, and why we're happy that you have this passion, is you can be advocates, and it doesn't necessarily require votes on your part or on our parts. It's bringing it to the attention of the right people. I mean, you educated all of us this evening about things. I think that we educated you, but I think there are a lot of things you want to do that don't require any approval moving forward. It's a matter of working with the right people on the government side, not necessarily on the board side, to get those changes made. If there were any other closing thoughts?
I
or
had
any-
one more thing I wanted to
Sure.
address, if that's okay. So
Absolutely.
it's just like, it's just the tree replanting, another kind of issue that we have on our docket and that we've been talking about is just, there's obviously trees coming down they're old and they could cause a danger if they fall, for sure, on people's houses. But there is no tree replanting line item in the DPW budget. I met with the arborist, and it doesn't seem like there is. I've talked to James too in the DPW, and it doesn't, nothing has pointed to me that we do have money in the budget for tree replanting, so, which means in turn that it's not happening. However, the National Grid took down a lot of trees. I don't know the number, it was over 100, and they allowed us to let them know where, I think it was 24 or 25 trees could be replanted. So they talked to the arborist, and the arborist said, this is the list of trees, these are the
Yeah, when they
neighborhoods that
come
they
to
came
us,
down the
they
most.
request those trees, we negotiate
It's not
with
on
them. So that,
Wasn't on.
yeah.
So, but that's great, but that's done now. So now we don't have any, at least I don't think, maybe you guys can tell me different, that we do
Well,
have
the-
money in the budget
The
for
North
tree.
Andover Improvement Society, which is a very old organization, that was their function when they got started. They planted trees, like, for lack of a better word, almost legacy trees for future generations. And they could use some help.
I'm part of that society too. They
Oh,
don't
so
have
you
any,
know.
yeah, I've been working with Eva, and
Yeah.
we've been trying to kind of get together, but I don't think that it can be only on a volunteer organization. I mean, if trees are coming down, you know, just for the appeal of the town too, you know, we don't want our tree-lined streets to be gone.
Particularly in the downtown area. Out country, there's plenty of trees, but in the downtown, you know, from here a little bit further out into the old center, that we need more trees. We're losing some of our older trees that were planted many years ago. And I mean, Elm Street, there's one elm left on Elm Street, and we're hanging on to it by a thread sometimes. I think
Yeah.
they build roads around it and stuff.
Yeah.
But no, I absolutely agree with you. It's sort of a pet thing with mine, and we bring it up every now and again. And for negotiating something like Dick Valancourt said with National Grid, we try to get some trees from them. Or we had a fine that was paid many years ago, and I said, give us trees. And we got quite a few from that as well. But they need to be planted not just in the parks. They need to go back into the neighborhoods.
Well, the arborist has, you know, he has rules that he's well knowledgeable with trees, and he knows what type should be where, and, you know, that they shouldn't be here because the vibrations from the street make the tree lean this way
salt.
towards the houses. You know, he's very knowledgeable. I think the problem is that there's, you know, and I could be wrong, but that there's no money, you know, to replant. Is that true, Mr. Mailer? Do you know?
Well, first of all, where do I begin? Given the schedule at the time, there were not 100 trees taken down by National Grid. They were pruning what turned out to be some number less than that. Not all of them were taken down. They were commonly what happens is they have to prune around the electrical wires when the trees grow so tall. Otherwise, we end up with a community prone to a remarkable number of power outages, which is a complementary sign to where we stand on trees, but we suffer more power outages than a lot of other communities, and so they often cut around those, and when they do that, they come in with a pruning plan to the Board of Selectmen. When they came with that plan, the board talked to National Grid about a replacement program. They have completed that replacement. It was 25 trees, actually 20 and 5, I think we added. 20 were planted by them, some close to that. We do replace trees on a sort of case-by-case basis. I know that there was a long time ago, we actually planted trees on private property. That's a practice that almost all municipalities have gotten out of for liability reasons. I know that Jim Stanford is aware of it as a function of what we're talking about next year's budget. But again, I think it's just a balance between what you're choosing. One of the disappointments that most residents have is that you don't plant the elms and oaks anymore. You just don't plant them because they have invasive, I get an equal number of tree complaints to sidewalk complaints. And there's a direct correlation because the roots from elms and oaks, which are beautiful trees, grow underneath the sidewalks and lift the sidewalks. And so municipalities are no longer planting oaks and elms in commonly traveled areas. They're what we call fruit trees, or trees that are smaller. They don't have the span. They don't look quite frankly as nice in the long term, but they address the curbscape. So we do replace trees on a case-by-case basis. Do we have a tree line item? No, but we have a north of $1 million DPW budget that's used, you know, depending on the nature of the circumstance if one's taken down. Are we more aggressive about removing dead trees than we are about replacing them? Yeah, that's fair. And I think that, you know, part of what Jim's been charged to do is come up with a steady replacement, sort of one-for-one plan around those things. And I think we'll continue to do that. But one of the real risks is that when you drive down Main Street and see these really massive and beautiful trees, is that they're not going to be replaced in kind, because it has its own struggles, which is disappointing. It's sort of a challenge. And I would say that the common we've planted, in addition, in terms of beautifying and adding greenery, we've added more than 25 trees to the common alone.
No, the common looks great.
Yeah, no. Well, that was a plan approved by the board. I don't want to go down that road. I'm just saying the plan had trees as well. So, and there's been some odd trees, some celebratory trees planted in areas we're dedicating to certain individuals. So I would certainly say that we could be better about replacement of trees, and that Jim is currently working on, as part of next year's budget, a replacement program so that so many would be replaced on a regular basis. But I'm still not sure that it would be a line item that said trees, but it'll be something that's contemplated through the process of the DPW budget. Yep, that's a fair point.
Shrimp are very street friendly, they're salt resistant, they're hardy, and they have a lot of color.
Just the roots.
Well, yeah, you just have to pull them back in.
Roots are problems.
Yeah.
Yep. We did attempt to pass, one last thing, and I know I'm now kicking it too long, right? We did attempt to pass a Tree City USA initiative here several years ago, and the policy associated with that was not well received. Because there are regulations associated in order to become a tree city. Well, Bruce was here. There were a number of requirements / commitments, and I would go back a little bit about the solar program. For us, it's a little bit about what are the regulations that are motivating the program. A lot of these programs are really great. The question is, what's the regulatory requirements? What is that going to mean in terms of our compliance to meet those regulatory requirements? So for us, we want to make sure that the regulations feel about the same in terms of a lift as to the benefit to the community. And anytime it's close, we certainly would embrace the programs. So that's one that happened with Tree City USA several years ago. I think we attempted to get involved in the program, and there was a lot of requirements which it was ultimately determined we have difficulty in meeting. But we could revisit that as well.
We have the green community designation now, right?
We do have the green community designation, yep.
And we got a good amount of money for that?
Yes, we did.
And is that public knowledge where that money goes? Like, I'm
Of course,
just
it's
curious.
stated at public meetings all the time, yep.
Is it? Yeah, okay, because I was
course.
just curious what
That's
kind of,
what
I mean,
We
obviously. the
identified three,
LEDs
the LED streetlights are part of the,
that.
there's three pieces to the program. The electric car and the charging station was one of them. Two, spend more than $50,000 in the public schools to retrofit lighting, which is in addition to the more than close to $4 million spent overall, large part in school-related improvements to increase and reduce their energy footprint. And the third piece is part of the streetlight program. We've applied to an additional grant for the streetlight program, which has been awarded to do an audit of the streetlight program and prepare a bid for that. We'll use some additional Green Communities dollars for the changing of the LED, and then apply for additional Green Communities funding to pay for the balance of the LED replacement on those. Those will include the high school facility as well as the middle school facility, all of our 1,300 lights in the community that are streetlights as well. Yep, all Green Communities funding.
Great,
And
yeah,
if they're
just,
public, we talk about them all the time, we social media about them all the time, and we
great.
communicate whenever we can about those things. So certainly, however we can, feel free to call our office, we'll tell you whatever we're doing on those. Yep.
That's great. I mean, that's tremendous work. I'm also interested in what we can do going forward to further expand green communities and access other funds. And is there anyone or any function within the town that's kind of looking at that, other than yourself?
Laurie in my office, Laurie out of my office is my personally designated, because she has so many titles, of the Green Communities Liaison for this, so she did most of the grant work associated with
Okay.
that grant. Obviously, we had to change some of the bylaws in terms of getting to the stretch code to comply as the community that rejected the stretch code several years earlier. So with the support of this board, we aggressively pushed this year to get the stretch energy code passed. And that was really a function of this board's support and work by my staff to get the stretch energy code passed. It failed, I think, 5 years earlier, 6 years earlier, and therefore we did not receive the funding. 270, grant number was 178, Green Communities. Somewhere about 170. So again, we'll look at any project as long as it's consistent with those kinds of things that we're doing. We'll always open a project. Typically, the facilities director, who has a connection to your committee, often comes up with programs as it relates to things that he thinks are important. We've changed most of the lights in town and in buildings and other places. This parking lot is a really good example to do that. We have a $1.7 million energy management system managing all of the energy in our community and all of our buildings. Controls when energy comes on and when it goes off. We're highly sophisticated in that arena. It's all buildings, school and town, have those kinds of devices in them. And so if there are other ways that we can be more efficient in those ways, we're open to those. We continue to explore them on our own, and have been pretty aggressive about finding ways to try to get those things done whenever possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
One last thing around, we mentioned it earlier, around Solarize Mass, or if we were to look at a Solarize North Andover program, what is your advice on how we would approach that? Or would you look for a recommendation from us as to how to?
Yeah, I would say you want to collect data on it, understand what it involves, and then, either bring it to the town manager's office
Yeah.
and start working through. But I think first it is collecting the data and understanding what's involved and what hurdles
Okay.
need to be, passed.
Because again, it's more for the residents than it is
Correct.
for the town, but again, I know there's a lot of residents that are continuing to look at.
And I think, I think that you guys now have been given, I think, a lot of feedback from us that you can go back as a committee and weigh
absolutely.
what ones you want to pass, because a lot of what you've discussed
Yeah.
requires a lot of legwork on behalf, even though there are 8 of you, on behalf of you. So you guys have to decide how to prioritize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I'd end up by saying that you can come certainly and speak with Andrew in the town manager's office anytime, and all of us have our emails and phone numbers online, and don't shy away from contacting us. So, thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
So, next item, under communications and announcement, we have a communication from our town manager for the commercial marijuana.
There's another green
Update.
topic.
Green indeed.
How'd that go? That was pretty good. So you have in your package a cover letter from myself and a letter from Town Council Suzanne Egan talking about how the legislative change in July really broadened the conversation about marijuana, both into the recreational, adult, whatever you want to call it. But have started to call internally commercial, because it seems like the easiest way to go. Commercial is synonymous for us with adult use or recreational. And some of the additional roles and responsibilities or opportunities, quite frankly, for the board to weigh into that dialogue as a function of the legislation being signed in July by the governor. And so she's outlined pretty clearly, first, the 5 categories of commercial marijuana enterprises, types, I think I've referred to in the memo, the various types, everything from cultivation to retail sale, and the board's ability, because we're a community that voted against the initiative petition, the board's ability to weigh in on those 5 categories and limit or prohibit any of those 5. And as a function of the decision, so let's start with the easy part. If there was no decision to limit or prohibit any of the 5, no further action is required. So if you to choose not to limit or prohibit, then there wouldn't be any need for a bylaw. And what's going on in the planning board in terms of land use just continues it down the path it normally goes down, ultimately needing town meeting vote. If the board were to decide on any of those 5 that they wanted to limit or prohibit, then you would need to take a vote to that effect. I want to limit this kind of use. And if you took that vote and it passed, then ultimately what town council is saying, in addition to that vote would need to be linked to a general bylaw which reflected what you voted, and therefore would go to town meeting to decide whether or not that bylaw, which limited or prohibited, would get adopted and become part of our general bylaw. So let's see if I can, so for instance, let's use, just because I say easy, meaning it'd be the most common topic. The board could choose to limit or prohibit the number of commercial retail establishments, what we call dispensaries under the medical, right? Storefronts that sell pot, okay, under commercial. The board could choose to limit the number or prohibit them from being in town. You can vote to decide that. That would then translate into a bylaw at the next town meeting. And the town residents would get to weigh in. This is all because the town voted against the commercial referendum question. And then town meeting would weigh in on whether or not they supported that bylaw or not. And town meeting's decision, of course, is final through a process. That would be in the form of a general bylaw. If that happened and the town voted to support, say, your position, these are not presumptions, these are just examples, then if a bylaw came up at the same time, which seemed to allow it, then in essence, if it passed as a prohibition, then you'd either need to modify the land use bylaw or pass it and it would have no value because it'd be a general bylaw which says you're not going to have these in town. What I would expect from a next meeting, probably the mid-October, is now that you have that explanation and any other questions you would have, you'd come into next meeting willing to sort of vigorously debate your position on these things. And that if they affect anything happening at the planning board, I would communicate that in writing to the planning board based upon your decisions, so that the planning board would at least be aware of your position on the 5 different categories. Because quite frankly, it would seem logical to me that if they're having a conversation about what to do with the comprehensive commercial marijuana bylaw, they should know your opinion. Now, ultimately, your opinion has to be supported by a town meeting vote, which is a simple majority. has to be supported by a town meeting vote, or it doesn't carry the weight of being a rule of town. But I think whatever thoughts you have in those categories should be communicated to the planning board so that if it affects or doesn't affect what they do, they should be aware of what your thoughts and plans are. Does that make
My
sense?
question is, how come we chose the word commercial? I think it's sort of vague, whereas recreational, we know exactly what it is.
Because everybody we talk to, it's not intended to be vague, everybody we talk to uses a different term. It becomes, it's a little bit difficult in-house here as we talk about different uses. It's recreational. Recreational is going a little bit out of vogue. Adult use is what's actually mentioned in the statute. When I think of adult use, I get into whole road discussions and I lose my focus on marijuana. So whole road is actually the technical term. And from our perspective, that has had come with some challenges. We can use whatever term you like. Commercial for our case, and it's spelled out very clearly in Suzanne's memo. Commercial means
Yes, but when people.
we'll use whatever term you want to use. I'm just explaining why we got there. It's just because adult use creates another level of confusion with folks on what that
Well, then you
means.
could just call it adult use marijuana or cannabis. or
Whatever you'd like to use is
I just think
more than happy
commercial
to
is
use.
just too vague for a very serious subject, which this town voted against, and that's why we're going down this road.
Yep, we're trying to create clarity, not be vague, so
Right,
whatever the board
thank you.
wants.
I think that commercial, though, is good because it's clear then that the use of cannabis to test, for example, in impairment detection devices, that requires a commercial license. You can't do that under medical. And adult use, implies only one thing.
Right.
Adults using it to get high. It doesn't imply anything else. And there are lots of other uses that are allowed, such as testing for impairment devices. Commercial is broader, and it is a broader use that we're talking about.
Why don't we just call it
than just-
non-medical?
Yeah, I was calling it non-medical in my own
Everything else,
mind
right?
until I got this
Yeah.
memo, but
It just doesn't fit as well. Yeah. And however you want that to ultimately be communicated, we're just trying to figure out how to communicate that, and sometimes non-medical doesn't always get into some of the things you're talking about, because quite frankly, the proposal on the table with the planning board is largely about some uses that have connotations that are beyond the consumption
right.
of marijuana, and those are largely commercial enterprises.
Limit to the general use marijuana law.
No, I think not.
I think it's something you could think about over the next 2 weeks, and whatever term you'd like to use, we're in.
We'll take that as an action item.
As an action item. On the broader level, the question is, of these categories, of these items, where does the board stand as it relates to these items? And then I will convey that sentiment back in the form of votes. I think it would make sense from my perspective, unless the board feels differently. You take each one of the 5, you decide whether you feel like there should be a limit or a prohibition, and you move on to the next one, limit or prohibition. If there's a limit, then what that limit will be, and make those decisions as best you can. And again, we communicate that. Ultimately, we'll need a bylaw to support any limits or prohibitions you place on there. The question would be, do you want to hear from the person that we do have a proposal out there, right, that's still percolating. Do you want to hear from the owner of that property about which one of those categories they want not limit and prohibit or not? Not that they couldn't comment in a public
I
setting.
think some input would be good, but just along the lines of clarifying, so 1 and 3, just I'm looking at marijuana product manufacturer as opposed to cultivator. So the manufacturer is not growing the marijuana. There's somehow of a middle business that's processing someone else's cultivated marijuana to be provided to other types of businesses, so they're kind of like a processor.
It could be both, because if you were the cultivator and then use the cultivated product, and I apologize for not being enough marijuana savvy to give you all the terms, but if you cultivated and then in another segment of your business use the cultivated product to derive other things that could be consumed, then you would be both the cultivator
And the manufacturer.
and your manufacturer.
Gotcha.
I cannot speak at any level of intelligence to what the whole craft thing is. That's with, right, because I don't possess that. And maybe that's something that the Osgood folks can speak to, not to advocate for, but to explain, quite frankly. It's So it's explained in there with a little bit of narrative. But I would say to you that the manufacturer could be also someone who cultivates and then manufactures, so they're not mutually exclusive options, right? Cultivation doesn't automatically give you manufacturer, and cultivation doesn't exclude you from being a manufacturer. The cleanest one to understand, quite frankly, is two, right?
Yeah.
It's, do you want retail marijuana shops in town, whatever we call them, non-medical, adult use, commercial? That's sort of the cleanest one to
Yeah,
put your hands around,
right, absolutely.
wrap your hands around.
I see Suzanne has a footnote here to the law, but I don't
Yes.
have it in front of me. Do you know off the top of your head the definition of marijuana establishment?
I do not. The legal definition for marijuana establishment, I do
Yeah.
not. We can get you that information and
No, I
have
can
Suzanne.
look it up. I
Yes.
Now, where is the commission on this? Have they finished their work?
No, the commission has not issued any regulations as it relates to cannabis. The Cannabis Control Commission has been formed. If you read how they would define what they're doing, they're aggressively proceeding toward issuing regulations. Those regulations have not been released yet.
So, my question is this, so why don't we wait till they're done? Or is this too time sensitive that we would have to make our decision on 1 through 5?
Yeah, I think that the only risk to that, you certainly could do that. I just think that right now there's an active conversation happening at the planning board. And I think not having your opinion as a board, I think if the planning board continues to have the conversations, your opinion is relevant. And I would be concerned that if you wait, doesn't mean you couldn't change your mind based on the regulations, but if you wait for the regulations and the planning board concludes or impacts what it's doing in the interim, and your opinion hasn't been provided to the board, I don't think that's
But
good.
we have a moratorium from a year from November.
Right, but you
So
ha-
I don't understand why we're rushing into it. My concern
not-
too is, we've got this proposal that we're hoping to put together for Amazon, and I think it could give mixed messages to the Amazon people or to the public. I know you feel differently, but we have a moratorium the town meeting unanimously voted for a year from November. The commission hasn't finished their work. What's the rush? Why does it have to be at our next meeting?
I'm simply saying to you what I'm advising you. You can do whatever you want, and let's put it in perspective. That's my role. First of all, I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with you, but the property owner's been very clear. They are willing to proceed down the Amazon route, but they're not going to put on hold this other business proposal. That's their choice as property owners, tax-paying property owners to make. It's not my choice for them. That's a choice that they've chosen to take. That's fine. That's their choice to make. As it relates to the rest, all I'm communicating is facts. The fact is the planning board is having active conversations, and has now for 2 months, about the prospect of replacing that moratorium with a comprehensive bylaw on the topic of marijuana. I don't know when they will be completed with their work, but they are moving down a road where they're reviewing a bylaw. And I believe that it is in your interest to explain, even if it's don't do anything, stop and wait. I believe that it's in the best interest of the board for you to communicate your opinion to the planning board, as opposed to having them complete it. Let's say they complete the work and they come back to you in December and say, I want to proceed with a special town meeting, and they've crafted a bylaw where you haven't weighed in on any of the things which could be limited or prohibited.
But we have a moratorium.
The moratorium will be replaced by a new bylaw, and the committee, the planning board, is working on the replacement bylaw. That's exactly what they're doing. The committee is not working on addressing a request by Osgood Marijuana. They're actually working on what will be the replacement that will rescind the moratorium. And so what they're doing is crafting the bylaw, because you need a bylaw, just like we had a bylaw for medical. Now that commercial adult use recreational is legal, we will need a bylaw to make sure we can manage it. You cannot live without a bylaw, because in that case, anybody could place anything in the town that they wanted. So the planning board is charged with creating a comprehensive, meaning medical and non-medical bylaw, to be presented at a future town meeting. That's what they're charged with. It is practical, although I did at town meeting say there was an amendment to extend it to November, sure, because it wasn't worth the debate. The reality is that's not likely to be next November. We take annual town meetings, so it's likely that.
But that was a unanimous vote at town
I
meeting.
understand,
It
but-
wasn't a split vote. The
but I'm-
people said, yes, we support the moratorium, which is a year from November.
The the motion made, there was a motion to amend that. I'm just simply saying to you that I don't expect that this is going to take a year. The planning board is moving too fast to imagine that they're going to need a year to come back to a town meeting in next November. It is more practical to believe it'll happen before that. I'm not in a debate with you. I'm giving you advice that if you can choose not to take that advice, to not take the action on the 5 items. I want you to be aware that you have a role. And then it's your decision as to how you want to embrace that role. I just want you to make aware of the fact you do have a role. That's all.
Could be communicating, effectively what you're communicating this evening, which is wait until November. That's an option, even though it's not one of these 5 options we're being asked
That's
to
what I
weigh in.
mean. That's why it's a little bit confusing. You know, the town meeting said that we have a moratorium for a year from November. The Commission on Cannabis hasn't even completed their work.
Can I ask
So
a point
it's
of
a little-
information? If we pass a bylaw that's inconsistent with what is produced by the commission, how does that,
Yeah,
How does that
you get into
jive?
an interesting area. So the bylaw would be broad enough to embrace, or it would make reference to those conditions, right, that are put out by the cannabis. I'm not defending one position, I'm just
No,
simply
no, I'm just
answering.
saying,
Yeah,
it's a
well, I just
process
want to be clear,
question.
because all I'm doing is teeing up for you what's in front of you, and you can decide how best to proceed. I would assume a bylaw would include some language which says, any regulations adopted by the Cannabis Control Commission would become part of the bylaw. That's what I believe would be done. That embrace a future piece on it. That's a guess. I'm only guessing on how they would do that. The alternative is to wait for the regulations and incorporate them as is. That's certainly another option.
But
Does the
even
town,
anything-
sorry.
No, I was gonna say, anything we do or any decisions we make on this is not going to eliminate the moratorium. It's just going to be
Right.
effective after the moratorium would be, has run out. I mean, it's just being proactive, I think, and looking at the different options that we have. I'm not saying, I don't think we would, remove or ask to have the moratorium removed. We're just thinking proactively what to do, once that moratorium does run out.
Well, that's what I was
Planning
gonna
board does its
ask.
job.
It legally, when the planning board brings a new bylaw before a town meeting and we vote on that new bylaw, which we agree we have to have a bylaw. And that was the point of the moratorium, was to allow time
Right.
to do the bylaw. But does passing a new bylaw automatically negate the moratorium, or no? We have to vote to get rid of the moratorium, or wait till it's.
I don't know what the technical audits look like, but in essence, a new bylaw replaces the moratorium.
Right.
It's bad example, but the example we used on wind turbines. So we placed in a moratorium, and we also did it for medical. Placed a moratorium on medical marijuana with the purpose that the planning board would work on a bylaw which would replace the moratorium. So the moratorium is in essence a bylaw. It marks a place
We're
in time
replacing that
so that
bylaw
folks
with a
can't come in and do something in the interim, right? It's preventing entities from coming in and doing things we don't want them to do until such time there's a replacement. So when the replacement is voted, whatever the technical is, whether it's actually, regardless of what the motion is, when the new bylaw is adopted, it will replace the moratorium, which is just there to make sure that if the state moved really aggressively and allowed people to get licensed, so there is an example. So if they get licensed, it allows us to make sure that one of those entities now with a state license doesn't move in without our opportunity to get a bylaw in place. So the moratorium will be replaced by a successor bylaw, which will be a comprehensive marijuana bylaw.
But the moratorium, correct me if I'm wrong, was one of, the charges from the state to give towns time to get ready for it. So I would think that would be really, if we're working during the moratorium and they just come in before the moratorium's up and.
No, that's the point of the moratorium, is to make sure they can't, right? I may
Exactly.
have miscommunicated.
Okay,
The
so,
point of the
okay,
moratorium, though,
I did
the
misunderstand.
moratorium is, I just want to make sure that you understand that the moratorium is really a bylaw, which prevents. That's what it does, right? And as soon as the successor comes in that allows it with conditions, that other one goes away. However the technical motion works, one gets replaced with the other, right?
Sounds like a little bit of bait and switch from one meeting to another.
But isn't this really about, this is really the first step. I mean, the planning board is not the ultimate go for the project in any event, right? So really what we're talking about is getting the first step of the process organized, because ultimately, any project, if that has to go forward, has to go through multiple other steps beyond that in terms of licensing in front of the town. Is that correct? health.
If we're talking specifically to
Yeah.
to this particular applicant?
Yes.
Then they need a couple of things. They need a bylaw to operate, and then they would need special permits to function, and that would be through the planning board.
So,
Well, they
the-
need zoning changes.
That's what I'm saying, the planning board would have zoning
Yeah,
changes.
right.
That would need town meeting vote to vote the zoning changes. And then they would need to apply to the special granting, permit granting authority, which is the planning board, and go through that. Yes.
so this is not, if you say yes, it's go. It's a matter of being, I think part of our challenge is helping people understand this is part of the process to vet it. It is not the final stage.
Well, I'm not saying that with this. I'm saying something slightly differently.
Okay.
I'm saying that that when the statute passed, there were 5 definitions of commercial marijuana. I'll stick with that for now. There were 5 possible uses, growth periods, whatever it is, right, for non-medical marijuana. And that with that, because the town in fact did vote no, the legislature afforded the town, something it did not afford those communities that voted in favor. It said that a town meeting could adopt a bylaw which limited or prohibited any of the 5. You control town meeting warrant. So I'm not talking specific to the development, I'm talking about the statute and what needs to happen. You control the town meeting warrant. And that doesn't mean, though, that someone couldn't come in with a citizen petition, quite frankly. That's allowed as well. But it would seem to me that you'd want the conversation to start here, because as the chief policymakers in the town, waiting for something else to happen that you react to.
So the way,
Just from my
Well, we
perspective, I
put the
thought you'd
same
want to be at the
thing.
lead of the
I
policymaking
understand,
discussion.
but just to say that we would discuss and perhaps vote on it at our next meeting.
You can do it as ever long you want. I'm just giving
It
you,
just seems quite rushed.
I
you
think,
do whatever
you
you
know,
feel is appropriate.
I agree, we probably wouldn't be, voting on it. I think they open for discussion and start, teeing up some of the thoughts we have in these areas. Like, I think, one of the things that we would probably talk heavily about is the retail aspect of it, a retail establishment. Do we want to allow those if we can't, not allow them entirely? I don't know if we have that right or not, but do
Yes,
we
you
want to
do.
have those?
Yeah, we do. We can just say no.
We
It
can
could be a
really
drive
do
Well,
down.
town
So, all
meeting
right,
would
that's
have to
fine.
approve
Or
it,
do
but
we
yes.
want to, put them in a certain space, or a certain area, or do we want to limit the number? So those are the kind of conversations we have to have.
I'm sorry, and I think it's a great example, because there is a bylaw being discussed. And one of the questions before the planning board, if you're watching or attending, is, should these be allowed and where? So if this board ultimately decides they do not want to allow them, and that's the recommendation they're gonna make to town meeting, you would want to, regardless of whether you think it's a year or from now, it's not going to be, in my opinion. So you would want to make that recommendation to the planning board while they're developing a bylaw, because it cuts one whole piece from the conversation. Whether or not there's going to be retail and the possibility of what zones it would take place in. That seems to be a really clear one to me, that the sooner you get that information, it doesn't have to be next, I mean that in context, right? That waiting till next April or May would seem, it just has ramifications.
And
of doing
if we
that.
do- oh, go ahead.
They could be doing work that's, if we're gonna say we don't wanna allow any of this, they're doing work that they shouldn't be doing. I think that's,
Right.
Right.
And quite frankly, creating all kinds of, people wondering whether they're talking, if they start talking about this zone versus that zone, and creating this community conversation, this, in some case, aggravation, when maybe the chief elected board has an opinion that they
would appreciate knowing.
may not be here, or certainly would appreciate knowing that gets conveyed to the planning board.
Yep.
In this case, that's a policy question, and the planning board, in my opinion, should be respectful of your policy position. So knowing any aspects of this that they could, while crafting the bylaw, is, in my opinion, helpful from a policy perspective.
And if we don't do it before the moratorium expires, then we don't have anything in place.
I
right?
agree with you.
We won't have
I
that
agree that
town,
we
we don't
should
have the town
Do
meeting.
it before it's finished.
We don't have the town meeting authority at that point if it's in November, so we need to do it before that moratorium expires. We need something in place to manage that.
And I would say, regardless of any other date, the planning board, they're too far along, and it takes not sufficient time to imagine that they're not gonna have a bylaw no later than ready for this town meeting, which means it'll be done no later than probably February, and could be sooner, but I'm saying, so I wouldn't have the board expect that they're gonna be planning to have a bylaw by any November town meeting of next year. It just won't be that late. I mean, they can decide not to put it on a warrant, I guess, and we can move back into a special, but their work will be done well in advance of that. I just want to be, it seems evident that that's
Well,
the
in
case.
advance of the May town meeting.
Yes.
Because there was talk of a special town meeting.
I'm not-
I just don't see how that,
I'm just I'm not saying there is or isn't, or where they are, I'm just saying remember, I recommended and the board adopted the May date. It was a motion made on the floor to extend it to November. It just wasn't worth the debate, quite frankly. But there was never any real expectation by this board or I that we'd ever get beyond May. It just was added, and it just wasn't worth a debate back and forth about whether you needed November. Some towns do 2 town meetings on a regular basis, and so we sort of relented, we haven't done it in a long time, we relented to that. So I don't know when the planning board will be done, but it will absolutely be done in time for a May
well,
town
my
meeting.
concern was in, as you said, and you said, you know, it was a suggestion, but to have this extremely important discussion and vote on it at our next meeting while we're bidding for an Amazon project, except it's confusing to the public. It just seemed, and the commission's not done their work, town meeting voted for the moratorium, it's just too much, and I think we just need to slow it down a little bit.
And I expect the commission to be done in March.
Okay, fair enough.
So whatever the information is worth here, that's a guess. Not done, but I
Pretty
would
well
assume
on
we'll,
its way.
I assume we'll see some things in February or March.
Okay.
That's what I'm hearing
All right.
anecdotally.
That's, okay.
Any additional questions? Okay, so moving on, or I should say, are there any other communications or announcements from the board? Those were the 2 items on the agenda. Nope. Okay, moving on to consent items. We have a request of Dan Pass to hold the MDA boot drive at the roundabout at the town common. I don't know if anybody's here this evening. No one's hiding behind the podium to speak to this.
Mr. Chair, I move approval that the North Andover Fire Department has permission to run their annual boot drive September 30th
I
for
second that.
MDA.
Okay, so motion made by Selectman Valencourt, seconded by Selectman Spadili, and just as a clarification, MDA is Muscular Dystrophy Association. And so, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, none. Motion carries. Good luck, guys. Next item on the agenda, we have a request from Irene O'Brien from the Senior Center to accept food donations from Stop and Shop for the Senior Center. Anybody here this evening to
I
speak to this
can
one?
actually speak to this because this came to me by a citizen who he and another gentleman, and it's kind of written up in our packet, how they get started, where there is really good food, not past its date, but just overstocking. And Stop and Shop has been, they had found themselves throwing away perfectly good food, and there's an organization in town, a resident in town, who is working with Stop and Shop to deliver the food to places in need, whether it be a homeless shelter or the Veterans Outreach or senior centers in Andover, so forth and so on. And I said, well, the only thing is, with donations, we do need to get approval of the Board of Selectmen. We just can't just go do it. He did talk to Irene O'Brien and some other people in town, and it's great. I mean, it kind of gets to the recycling. We don't want to be throwing perfectly good food away. And I did meet with this organization, with the manager at Stop and Shop. And actually, to Stop and Shop's credit, they are very interested in getting involved in our town. I encouraged him to join the merchants, which he did. They really want to make a presence in the town of North Andover. I said, oh, we got plenty of things that we can get you involved in. So this is, you know, as of right now, it's all good. So
Good work. So do we want to give you the honor to make the motion?
I would be delighted to do that. Thank you very much. So I would move approval that the town of North Andover, working through John Tierney, and I forget his person that he's working with, and Stop and Shop through the management, accept the donations to the senior center. And frankly, I'd like to almost, but it's not on the agenda, so we probably couldn't, and any other organizations in town. But we'll talk about that, I guess, at another time. So we'll leave it at the senior center.
Motion made by Selectman Spadili, seconded by Selectman Keen. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And thank you, Selectman Spadili, for making that connection between.
It was really fun. It was really fun to say, we've got some really great food, and you know, sometimes the seniors who are on Meals on Wheels, it's just not enough, you know, that, just not enough food for all of them. So Irene O'Brien was thrilled.
So next item on the agenda is moving over to licensing. So do I hear a motion to move to licensing?
So moved.
Seconded?
Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
And licensing.
Okay, we're in licensing. So the first on the agenda in licensing, once again, is this license request for Richard Davenport, but he's actually withdrawing his request for a license. So I'm a little confused why this is on the agenda then. Do we need to take it
Because
off?
you continued it from last meeting, so it
Oh,
needed to appear
good
on the
point.
agenda. Yep.
Yeah.
So we need to vote to accept his request for withdrawal.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, any discussion? Okay, so this is a vote to accept the withdrawal request from Richard Davenport, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Motion carries. And then next on the agenda, we have from Merrimack College, a request for a couple of one-day licenses. Let me get to that. In Hoffenberg of Merrimack College requests 3 one-day wine and malt licenses for theater concessions at the Rogers Center for the Arts on September 28th and 29th, 2017, from 6 to 10:30 p.m., and October 19th, 2017, from 6:30 to 11 p.m.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board of Selectmen acting as licensing commissioners approve the 3 one-day wine and malt licenses for Merrimack College for events at the Rogers Center for the Arts on September 28th and 29th and October 19th as presented.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I have a motion to move out of licensing.
Motion to move out of licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Back to the full board. So we have no items under old business, no items under new business. Any public comment? Seeing none. We have the town manager reports this evening. Any questions?
I strongly recommend the Selectmen speedily make a motion to adjourn.
So moved. I just whispered to him, because we have another meeting to attend.
So, Selectman Smedili, motion to adjourn. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We're done.